As the host of Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast, I am delighted to be able to bring you this podcast. My name is Wendy Lopez, and I would like to introduce myself to you. I specialize in helping people overcome their emotional blocks through different techniques, through emotional empowerment coaching and compassionate healing light facilitation. As a mom who has experienced narcissistic trauma, I help moms eradicate self-doubt in order to regain self-confidence to elevate their status both at home and at work. In our podcast, we discuss people's struggles, triumphs, and failures. We dive deeper into self-love, self-compassion, self-acceptance, and mindful, holistic tips. In every episode, I hope that you can take a golden nugget of advice and apply it to the journey of motherhood in order to raise your level of awareness. Welcome to the Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast, where you find healing and creative mental thought advice from experts on past pain, narcissistic experiences, and trauma. Today, I have Suzanne Culberg. So welcome to the podcast, Suzanne. She is an author and coach who helps overgivers and people pleasers learn to set boundaries and say no without feeling mean. Suzanne is known for her straight talking about her wacky t-shirts. She lives in Sydney, Australia with her husband and two awesome children. Also, Suzanne has written a book you can find on Amazon. It's called The Beginning is Shit. The Beginning is Shit is a heart-wrenching and inspiring story of a woman desperate to achieve a healthy and uncomfortable weight and a comfortable weight. Her frustration, right? Yeah. Her frustration with many diets she endures and the ultimate discovery that leads her to ditch dieting and release weight for good. So I really do love that. As you're speaking about weight and then you're speaking about trauma today. And one of the things that I was intrigued was when you mentioned about your trauma with your first child, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Can you tell us about that? What was going on in your life at that time?
Well, when my to backtrack a little bit, my husband and I had been together for 10 years, and I will be honest, we weren't sure whether we wanted to have children or not. My sister's child-free by choice, and we were like, honestly, we don't know. And we'd moved around a bit. We originally lived in Tasmania, so like down the bottom of Australia, the tiny island that gets left off most of the maps. And we moved to Queensland. And the plan originally was, we'll live in Queensland for a year, we'll go home. And yeah, we just didn't. So for me, part of having children was the support network that, like obviously we'd made friends, but I wanted my mum to be around. I wanted my sisters. I wanted my kids to grow up with, my potential kids to grow up with their cousins. So basically we chose a time, we'll wait. And also, share, my family has a history of early menopause, so very early. So I was like, well, we'll need to make this decision on the earlier side compared to most, because otherwise it might be taken away from us. Side note, that ended up being fortuitous because I ended up having a hysterectomy last year in my 30s. So anyway, I digress. So anyway, the cutoff we chose was 28. I got to 28 and we were like, oh, well, yeah, let's have kids. And I thought it would take a while to get pregnant because I'd seen experiences and whatever. We got pregnant the first month. And sometimes I don't like to share or talk about that because I understand some people do have struggle and they have years and they have IVF but people don't talk about things going well because there's an embarrassment, like, oh, well, we shouldn't feel like this. But my husband was over the moon. And to be honest, I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this, because I'd kind of in the back of my mind, been like, this would be like 6 months or something. And it was
like I still have time.
So it was like, oh, okay. And the pregnancy itself, that pregnancy wasn't overly difficult. However, towards the end, I started getting signs of preeclampsia. So they were monitoring my blood pressure and my proteins very frequently. And that's the other thing I didn't mention. So we had saved money. We had both worked. We'd had the double income, no kids lifestyle. We were very fortunate and privileged. We built our dream house. And the pregnancy went rather well. But in the first trimester, I was very sick, like a lot of us are. And I was at the fortunate stage where I could just wind up work. So I left work and we were in a financial position where that wasn't going to be an issue. Then when I was 12 weeks, my husband got made redundant unexpectedly. They were like, we are downsizing. He works in power. We don't need as many things now because of the uptake of solar power. Congratulations, you don't have a job. And we were like thrown into a tailspin because his work was the primary employer for the town that we lived in. So with them downsizing and hundreds of people out of work, we could not live there anymore. There was nothing else for him in that town. We were very fortunate to find another job quite fast, but we had a house that was our dream house that we'd built that we then really couldn't sell because the whole town had because when the primary employer goes, it's the other thing you don't think about, the knock-on effect, the florists, the hairdressers, like everything else, the massage in town is no longer needed because there's not so many people. So the big lesson we learned from there is not to move to a place that has like one place that's supporting the whole town, because if that place goes. So anyway,
interesting.
We moved, but we were stuck with a house that we couldn't offload, and nobody wanted to rent because nobody was living there anymore. And we actually moved interstate, so from Queensland down to New South Wales. And so then my husband obviously didn't have any leave or anything saved up for when we had the baby because he'd just started a brand new job midway through our pregnancy.
Yes, right.
So all the appointments, the scans, everything I went to on my own. And I remember it was quite hard because I had no family and I had no friends, and we just moved to this town. And I remember talking to my mum on the phone, and she wasn't really supportive. She was like, well, at least you have a husband. And and now, like, on the other side of it, there probably was like prenatal or whatever you call it, depression there, because everything had been taken away. And when I tried to reach out for help, it was just like, oh, well, it's not that bad. It was kind of downplayed a lot.
Okay.
So at the very end of my pregnancy, like from 38 weeks when this preeclampsia was happening, the local hospital was like, we can't handle a difficult birth, so you're going to have to go to the next town, which is an hour away. And they wanted to monitor me daily. And we only had one car. So I dropped my husband at work, come home, then drive an hour to these appointments, and then go pick him up and then come home. And it was challenging. It was a lot. And then at one of the appointments, my daughter was measuring big, and they were like, okay, it was on my due date, we'll give you an induction because of size, you know. So I packed my little overnight bag, and Jeremy took the day off work and drove me in. And then the lady was like, no, we don't do inductions based on size. So like, just go home. And it doesn't sound that bad in retrospect, but at the time it was really emotional because he didn't have much time taking that day off. And then like, what happens when we have the baby and he's got no leave left and all these sorts of things. And my family was interstate, so I didn't want to book anyone to visit or mum to help until we had the baby, because she was also working too. Anyway, as we went to leave and they did the urine test and everything they do, they're like, oh, you're not going anywhere. Your proteins are too high. You're going to have the baby now. And I was like, oh, okay. So they started the induction. This was on the Wednesday. You're ready to meet your baby, whatever. Induction process was not pleasant. So Wednesday, nothing. They did the tape and stuff. And then Thursday, they're like, here's this thing called the balloon. Not recommended. Some people didn't have any issues with it. I had a lot of issues with it, and they insert the balloon. And anyway, to cut a very long story short, every day they're like, today's the day you're going to meet your baby. And my husband had to go back to work because nothing was happening, and he had the number, and they're like, just call him when she's in active labor. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it's funny, we had private health, but there's an excess that you have to pay in Australia. And because we'd just changed jobs and everything, I was like, no, I'll just go through the public system. And not to knock them, they do their best. But every time they had a shift change, somebody else would have a different opinion about how we were going to manage this. So we were doing this moment, and then 8 hours later we were doing this, and then 8 hours later we were doing this. And on Saturday they were like, okay, we will start the Syntocin or whatever it is, the drip. And yeah, to cut a very long story short, started active labor. It was the weekend, so my husband didn't have to go to work. It finally fully dilated, pushed for 2 hours, and then nothing. Contractions stopped, everything stopped. And they said, we'll have to give you a cesarean. And what had happened was, when I started pushing, they called the team, because by this time it's like midnight, and they're like, don't worry, we're having a baby, go home. So they all went home. And then they're calling them back at 2 a.m. going, actually, no, we need you in theatre like now.
Oh, my God.
And I remember my husband being taken away. Oh, the other thing, all things that I didn't talk about in the book, so I don't give too much detail. I was allergic to the gas. It made me vomit. So they had to take that away. I'm allergic to so many things. Then they gave me something to stop the vomiting, but it felt like there was things under my skin. So like I could see bugs. Like It was the weirdest thing. So I was screaming about the bugs. And
oh, wow. So made you like hallucinate.
It made me hallucinate, yes. So
Wow.
And anyway, by this stage, and I remember being in a little room outside the theatre, like where they prep you, and them bitching and moaning about coming back in. Like, oh, I just got home. You got home, I didn't even get home. And I'm thinking, I have been here for 5 days. I have had contractions for 22 hours. I am exhausted. I don't give a shit about like and anyway, so then we go into the theatre, and the wall, my husband's allowed back in. Behind his head is the clock, and it's 2:15 when they start, and they can't get my kid out for hell or money. And I'd seen cesareans. I'd actually been to medical school and been through this. And I said to Jeremy, it's taking too long. And he's like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's taking too long. Because she had descended into my pelvis, because I'd pushed for 2 hours, they couldn't pull her back up because she was stuck.
Oh,
so they couldn't get her down, and they couldn't get her up. And then I remember them coming towards me with the mask. I thought they were going to knock me out. And I started freaking out. And they're like, no, it's the gas. I'm like, you can't give me the gas. It makes me vomit. And they're like, no, we need the gas to relax your pelvis because she's trapped. Like, well, they didn't say trapped. They tried to keep it calm. Then the registrar fainted. Like it was like just crashed, and it was very traumatic. And the funniest thing about all of it was when they gave me the gas and I started vomiting, then they suctioning it. So like it was a nightmare. It was horrific. My blood pressure was going crazy. And through it all, my husband's just so calm. Like I cannot believe to this day how calm he was. Then when they finally got her out, they pulled her out by forceps by her feet. And to this day, she has these marks on her feet. Thank goodness it wasn't her head. And we went to the podiatrist last week. They're like, what's this? I'm like, that's the forceps from when she was born. But they lifted her out, didn't tell me if it was a boy or a girl, didn't get to see her. They just whisked her off. And honestly, by this stage, I didn't kind of care because vomiting and bugs and suctioning, and they had to tie me down. They had to tie me to it. So I felt like I was like being crucified. It was just horrific. And my husband goes off with my daughter and I'm just there. And then when they finally bring her back, I don't know how long, I remember the very first thing, like you see movies and you hear about the moment and the bonding and whatever. I was like, and my daughter knows this story. We laugh about it now, but I was like, she's got a bung eye because she had a blocked tear duct. Like that was all. And also too, she was all wrapped up. So all I could see was her face. I was like, my husband was enamored. You could just see the connection. He'd taken his shirt off. He got to do the skin to skin. He'd done all that. And all I was like, she's got a bung eye. So, yeah. And it was horrible. And by this stage, it was Sunday. So it was 5 days. And it was so funny because every day they'd said you get to meet your baby. Like today's the day. And on Saturday, I was like, today is the day. Like, and it was like, even then it was still Sunday.
Oh my goodness. So once you had the baby, you said you had some PTSD. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, I couldn't breastfeed. And it's funny, I didn't have the birth I wanted. So I was determined by hook or by crook, I was going to breastfeed. I refused formula. I was like, no. And she was a big baby when she was born, and she just kept dropping weight. And then the hospital was full, so they sent me home, and they were like, but you can come in daily to get her followed up on. And I remember she was still losing weight, and she hadn't, we're talking all things, she hadn't done a poo since she was born, like that very first one, and she still had crystals. And it was like day 9, and they're like, you need to give her some formula. So that was a whole journey. My mum was visiting at the time, and I remember we went to see the child health nurse. Like, they usually come out to your home, but I was in there and I was like, no formula, like no, this, I had read all the stuff, I'd learned all the stuff, and she had the pictures on the wall of all the newborn babies, all quiet and snuggly and whatever, and Xanthi just screamed. She screamed constantly. She never stopped screaming. And she said to me, has your baby ever looked like this? And I was like, not once. And she's like, what would the harm be? And it was a little bit more formula, because, they didn't let her starve. So the lactation consultant had told me, sorry, I get confused, to give her 20 mils, like 1 tablespoon. Okay. So that's all I'd been giving her, 20 mils. And my mum was like, give her more. And I'm like, no. And now I've learned about accidental starvation and all this sort of stuff. I'm so grateful this woman saved my daughter's life. So she was like, what would be the harm in giving her a little bit more? Like, just a little bit more until she looks like this. And she pointed to the babies on the wall. And I was like, no, we're doing exactly what the lactation consultant said. I'm fine. And she's like, honey, your shirt is on backward and inside out. Have you had any sleep? And because the lactation consultant had told me to feed from both breasts, and Xanthi would feed for 30 minutes each side, was nothing there, we know now, and then pump for 15 minutes each side, and then do it on the 2-hourly. So I'd done this, like, she's like, so when are you sleeping? And my mum's like, she's not, because this whole process took an hour and a half.
Right.
And then that child health nurse saved my daughter's life, and every now and then I just send her a card of pure gratitude, because she was like, just a little bit more, just until she sleeps. And then I still persisted in trying to breastfeed for 3 months, but there was just nothing there. And then they didn't know, because all the things they gave me in that birth and all the trauma I'd had sometimes can stop it. But then it turned out later, after I had my son, some of the medication my mum took when she was pregnant with me, because she didn't know she was pregnant at the time, causes insufficient glandular tissue in the child. So it's like there wasn't any, because I never had any breast changes in pregnancy. I never had, like, everyone talks about the milk, like, none of that happened to me. Nothing.
Wow.
So anyway, long story short, they referred me, like, because I ask you all the questions after you've had a baby, and your shirt's inside out and backwards. She hasn't had any sleep. She's determined, like, didn't have a great birth, but's determined to feed. They referred me to a social worker, and also too, they had this scheme in New South Wales. It was brilliant, and where the nurse would come to your house, because, as I said, we only had the one car, and my mum had to go back. She could only stay for a short while. And at first I said, no, I'll be fine. And they're like, no, we really encourage you. And they started to use the term PTSD. And I remember just crying, because I was like, but I haven't been shot at, and I haven't been at war. Like, to me, PTSD is like, and they're like, but they're like, all the stuff that happens in your birth, like, we've got the chart here, that is the trauma. And to this day, it's funny, they've closed that hospital now, but when we still lived in that town, whenever I drove past that hospital, I just get the heebie-jeebies. I could not stand it. And when I had my son, I refused to go there. I was like, I don't care where we go, I ain't going there. So,
right.
But there's so much of this stuff's not talked about, because so many people say, well, as long as the child's healthy, and as long as the child's healthy. And it's like, but when the child is born, a mother is born too. Like, up until this stage, I hadn't been a mother. And putting everything towards her, I'm not saying ignore your kid or anything by any means, but like, what about yourself as well? And the things I took to be able to breastfeed, I took the lactation consultant, her husband was a doctor, so she got him to prescribe me this drug that's supposed to help the milk. It gave me a constant migraine. So my migraine, her
Oh.
screaming, the fenugreek, the lactation cookies, the water. Like I did everything. Everything. And then it was funny, like when I had my son, I was like, I am not doing any of that again. Like I did try once again, it didn't
Yes.
work, but I
Okay.
cut it to 6 weeks instead of 3 months, and I comp fed from the beginning with formula. And that's a whole other story in the hospital, because they're often breast is best, which I understand.
Mhm.
But the midwife, one of them, the rest were great, refused to bring me the formula. She was like, I'll just put him back on. And I kept asking her, and she kept repositioning him and leaving. And then at one time, I had him in the football hold. We were trying that, and I was so tired, and he was whatever. And I let go of him. I managed to catch him, but he nearly hit his head on the floor. And I remember paging that time, and I was like, this is not a request. Get me the formula.
Oh, I'm so glad. Can I ask you a
Yes.
question on where there's two things that you said, and I want to bring this forward to the audience. Where did you learn or have that belief that it was so important for you to breast the baby that it was starting to cause a starvation for the baby?
Well, in the prenatal classes we'd had, the lady who ran it was also, she was a midwife and a lactation consultant, and she was all about breastfeeding. And she had these diagrams that she showed on the board, and she was saying even one dose of formula, and she had the little infant gut, and was saying that, you know, the formula breaks down the intestinal villi, so the immune system isn't so strong. And some people will use a little bit of formula. Like she really explained it. She's like, no, you know, breast is best. And I just really latched on to that, and I was like, I didn't get the birth I wanted, but like, and I felt honestly,
but you were going to
I felt
hold
like
on
a failure.
to that part.
Like I felt like I failed my child, because
that's what I wanted to talk about.
And at the time, there was this meme going around that it was a picture of a woman's torso with the cesarean scar, and it was basically like, you're not really a mother because you didn't give birth. Like,
oh,
and I
my
remember
gosh.
just looking at that and crying. Like now I look at it and go, get out. But like to me, I was like, because I didn't even talk about the episiotomy. Like I'd had that as well. So I'd had the worst of both worlds, because like I'd done a 5-day labor, 2 hours of pushing, an episiotomy. Like they'd done all of that to try and get her out, because she was right down there. Wow. And then I had a cesarean as well. And you're trying to tell me that I didn't give birth?
I know. Right. Where's the logic? This is, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we're speaking about this, because one, you said you felt like a failure, and two, you were trying to be that perfect mother before even giving yourself a chance, at the expense of your child.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm so glad you did have a number two, and we're going to talk about that one. But how you were then able to stick with your instinct of, no, this is how I'm going to do it, because this is, you know, your body was not mechanically made. It wasn't systemically made, like the teacher was explaining.
Yes, because she was saying only 1%, and women didn't try hard enough, and people gave up too soon. And she was quoting all this data to me. And I remember being at a few places, like with my daughter. My husband was in Rotary at the time, and I was feeding her like a bottle. And this little old lady coming over, and she's like, I hope that that's expressed milk in that bottle. And I was like, excuse me? And she's like, I'm disappointed to see that you're not breastfeeding. And I remember just bursting out crying and going, I'm disappointed too. Like, we make assumptions about people, and we've got no idea what they went through or what they tried. Like too posh to push, or you know, too whatever to breastfeed, like too lazy. And I'm like, I was gutted.
Yes, absolutely. And prior to this podcast, I had an interview with another guest, and she said something that I want to bring it into what you experience. So shame is external. So she was giving from the external opinion what her belief was, bringing that shame to you as a mother, and you were already very vulnerable.
Yes.
At that point, and to absorb someone else's asinine thought that you're not a good mother. And here you were, like you said, no one has any idea of what you tried to salvage the perfect birth so you can be deemed as the right mother.
Yeah. And the other thing too, in all those classes, prenatal and everything, because they were so anti-formula, nobody had talked about how to actually do it. So it's like, how do I prepare the bottle? How do I sterilize it? How much do I give?
Right. That's true.
And I remember the lactation consultant said I could only give 20 mils. And I remember looking at the can, because also too, I had been super morbidly obese for most of my life, and I'd lost a lot of weight, got pregnant, regained it all. Anyway, I'll digress. I was so paranoid about my child being fat. And for my daughter, it was, and she was born big, like she was 9.5 pounds.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yes.
So I was like, because they say breastfed babies can't, they know when to stop and everything, but formula feed. So, and then I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, how do I sterilize this? How do I prep this? How do I get it the right temperature? Like, because the thing is, they don't tell you how to do it. And they say, you see some people microwave bottles, but then you get pockets of hotness, and then I had to buy a bottle warmer and which type of formula. And then there was constipation, and there was so many things. And she drank more than the lactation consultant said, so I was panicking, but then she was actually sleeping, and the lactation consultant kind of fired me. She's like, well, you're not following my directions. And so then I felt left by her, but it's okay. The other nurse started coming to the house. But I was like, she's drinking more than the tin says. Like, and they're like, no, babies, like, just feed what she wants. And I didn't know. And it just seems so simple, but when you're already so sleep deprived and you're not prepared, and like I hadn't bought a sterilizer or bottles or the right type of teat so they can actually, get the milk out, and all this stuff was in no way prepared for.
Right. And I feel like education is good. Like if you take the Moz class, the lactation class and the latching class and all that. But I also feel the moms need to know, like, to follow their instinct. And
Yes.
I remember when I had my first son, I just knew that my nipples weren't like milk producers. Like, I just knew. Yes. I don't know how I know, but I just knew. So even though breast is best, I do believe that because there is the vitamins, right, that they receive.
Yes.
Right. So what I did was I was like, I'm going to pump because he's going to get it. He's just not going to get it from my breast.
Yes.
Right. He's still going to get it. So when I had my second son, I already knew how I was going to manage this formula breast in me. So it's not my breast. It was going to be pumped out. He was going to get his expressed milk from me. And then I was going to give him formula. I had to sneak in the formula into the hospital because they were all about breast.
Yes. And there's also too, that's another thing I had to purchase, a pump. Not that anything came out. And they were just like, oh no, it's just stimulating.
Yes.
And it was funny because they kept talking to me about latch. Xanthi never struggled to latch. I honestly felt like she was going to suck my eyeballs out of my head and down and through my breast. Like, she latched that well.
She latched.
And I thankfully never had any issues with my nipples or anything. Because as I said, it wasn't her. It was me.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was interesting. They gave me this logbook, and they're like, log how long she feeds for. And I did. And I remember the nurses coming around in the hospital, and they're like, no, you only log how long she's at the breast. And I'm like, I have, because she was just constant, because she was hungry. And it was funny too. They said to me as well, that they don't take the children from you anymore. They stay with you the whole time. But Xanthi just never stopped screaming. Like, constantly. So at night they did come and take her for a few hours, but even then I still couldn't sleep because I could hear her. It wasn't a big hospital. I could hear her screaming.
Yeah.
So the fact that, it just all wasn't handled very well. It was a very different experience the second time around, but I knew so much more than I knew. That, like, I just assumed I'd been to the class, you have the baby, the milk comes in. Like, I knew there would be hiccups. I wasn't that naive, but yeah, and they didn't have formula. Same there. It wasn't until we went home and we were discharged and to come back in, and the weight was still dropping. And it amazes me how you can just fall through the cracks there. She was born 4.5 kilos. She got down to 3. So she lost nearly 30% of her weight.
Wow. So can you talk to us? Because this is the first time I've ever heard, because you said accidental starvation.
Yes.
I never heard of that until you said it. What happens? Like how is that known?
Well, when they're not producing wet nappies, because that's the other thing too, she still had crystals, like the orange dust stuff on day 9, and not producing bowel motions. They're just not, the body's breaking down. And I've read of a few cases of it where people were like me, no, we're going to breastfeed, whatever. And they didn't have that daily support, and they didn't have that check-in. And I think without that child health nurse saying, because my mum and my husband were begging me, let's give her more. And I wonder at what stage they would have intervened. Maybe, but the thing is, they couldn't, because I never slept. So I imagine they would have wanted to intervene, but because I was constantly, it's in hindsight it was thing. But then a few cases I've read about afterwards, and I was like, that was me, but I didn't. So there's this lady called the Fearless Formula Feeder, and she has a Facebook page. She cops so much rap and hate from people who are breast is best. But she educates about this kind of thing, and so it's
a thing.
It's totally a thing. Wow. But the other thing too, even with the formula feeding, how much little support I had, because some people were like, well, you could get donor milk. And I was like, well, there's two things there. Yes, you can, but I would have rather that go to preemie babies or whatever. But it's not so easy just to turn up at the donor milk thing and go, hey, because they're like, oh, you don't have to formula feed. You can get donor milk. It's not just that easy. And also too, to be honest, and I haven't never shared this as a personal opinion, but with the formula, I was preparing it. I was sterilizing the bottles. I was whatever. With the donor milk, if I just turn up at someone's house or get it from a place, I don't know how that's been stored or prepped or how old it is or how long it's been out. And then I'm giving that to my child, although the nutrients and the constituents of the donor milk is better. And I 100% understand that. I don't know how it's been handled since it's been expressed from the person. And that made me a little nervous. And how my daughter's gut would respond too. Because with donor milk too, if it comes from all different mothers and what they're eating, and then I have my child, and if I don't know what she's responding to, and with the formula, we had to try a few different brands till we found the one that her stomach would settle with. So it's not as easy as people think to just, oh yeah, well, you can go and do this.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So I want to go back to something that you said about, because I want the moms to realize this, that PTSD does not have to be war-like. It comes from an event that happens in your life. There's more awareness now, but it happens from an event that happens in your life, and it just loops into your mind, and it'll be triggered. So I thought that was so important that you said that it doesn't have to be warlike. It's an event that happened as traumatic as your birth that you have.
And you keep reliving. PTSD. Yes. Yeah. So I would relive when I went past the hospital. For the first 3 years, I relived on her birthday. I didn't enjoy my daughter's birthday because all I could think about was going through that again.
Birth. Oh my goodness.
And even now, she's 9, it's funny, I run my own business now. And on this year, I had my program was launching and whatever, and everything wasn't kind of going that great. And I remember my biz bestie going, it's your daughter's birthday. And I was like, yeah. She goes, how about you don't launch something on this time? And I was like, yeah. So I actually got my Google Calendar, because you can do forevermore, repeat yearly. That week, I don't promote anything. I'm not saying I have to go and sit in a hole and whatever, but energetically, there's just, I love her birthday now. We celebrate, we have parties and this, but there's something that's that was a 5-day experience and then people say the best day of your life is the day that your daughter's born or your child's born or whatever. It wasn't.
Right. It wasn't your experience.
No,
Now,
it
was
wasn't.
there with your PTSD, did you receive help, or how did you
Yes. So
get past how did you get past that?
I had like therapy, weekly therapy for
Mm,
a while. Didn't do any medication or anything, but and I remember the therapist, there was a local town centre that had the area that, you could take your child, because obviously
mhm,
she was young and I didn't have any family I could like leave her with or
mhm,
anything. They all got to know her there, so they were fabulous. And then they ended up transitioning into, they had like a play group that you could attend. So as you
mm,
get older, we still went, and they did like like art therapy and all sorts of programs about like bonding with your child. It was just, I was so fortunate that it was identified.
wow.
And then also too, for anyone listening, but you need to accept it. Like,
Mm,
I remember being so resistant in the beginning, because I was like, it made me, as I said, it made me feel like a failure and like I wasn't good enough and that there was something wrong with me. And to say yes to this help, like nobody can help you unless you're willing to receive that help. So the first few weeks I felt like, oh, other people have it worse, or it wasn't really that bad. And we downplay it. And suffering isn't a competition. And it's just like whatever
mm,
you're going through for you is valid. Because I remember thinking to myself, I have a child. Like, some people, they lost their child, or the birth resulted in a lifelong injury to the child. Like, I felt bad for being there because I was, in inverted commas, normal. Not saying other people weren't normal, but you know what I
mhm,
mean? Like, I felt like it wasn't bad enough to warrant getting this support. And I think so many of us feel like that.
mm.
Who gets to decide? Who's the arbiter of this is bad
That's
enough that you need
interesting.
help? Yeah.
Right, right. Wow. I think, that is huge for moms to be able to be aware and to surrender to support,
Yes.
right? I think there is a thing where moms need to learn to just surrender to support for the help. You
Yes.
you mentioned you weren't getting any sleep, so you were depriving yourself of sleep. The baby was being deprived from eating.
Yes.
So, a complete unhealthy situation. And you said something, suffering isn't a competition.
Yes.
Oh, wow. So we have put ourselves in this state
Yeah,
of
it's not bad
stuff.
enough because other people have
Yeah.
it worse. And the thing is, yes,
Mhm.
that's true, but that doesn't discount what you're going through. I think for anything at any stage in
Exactly.
life, as soon as we're like, oh,
Exactly.
there's other people that have it worse, that is discounting what you're going through. You
Right.
suffering more doesn't make people having it worse have it easier. And you getting help
Exactly.
and accepting help doesn't mean that other people are more deserving of it than you, or whatever. And I think sometimes we get in our head that there's people more deserving of this, or however we look at it, but they might also be unable to receive. And by you stepping up and getting the help and accepting that, you're modeling for others that
Yes.
that this is okay and everything. And I think the whole world will heal together, as opposed to us all trying to be
Mhm.
martyrs together.
Yes, right. And this is why I have this podcast, is to bring this type of healing and awareness of, we're not helping each other staying in this suffering. We're not helping.
Yes.
We're helping each other by, here I'm bringing you as a guest, sharing your stories and your gifts and your passion and what you do, and the others that are coming on board, so we can elevate from that not knowing to, okay, now we have a knowing and understanding that we don't have to stay in the suffering mode, and that we can
Yes.
elevate. Because if we stay in it, guess who suffers? The children continue to suffer. And
Yes.
my whole mission
100%.
is, right? My whole mission is for moms to be able to learn to love themselves more, so then the children can be loved more.
And I think too, another reason we continue to suffer is there are people like that woman who's like, I'm disappointed to see you're not breastfeeding, or the lactation consultant who was like, no more than 20 mils. And we take their voice on board. And then we don't listen to the people like my own mother saying just a little bit, or the friends saying, are you okay? Because we add the negative voices. So my advice to that for anyone is choose your audience, choose who you're going to share with, because the people who love and support you and want what's best for you are going to be encouraging you. And the people who are judging, they're probably projecting, as you said, that lady was probably projecting her own stuff or anything. And then we take that to heart. And in life, how often does anywhere, like you look at somebody like reviews, like I've written a book, you talked about it earlier, and there's reviews, and how often does the brain go to the negative ones? And now it's funny, this is the whole thing of a healing journey. When I look at them, I kind of go, well, I'm a real author now, because if it's only ever 5-star reviews, it's just my friends. So I think with anything, instead of fixating on the people, because there will always be people who judge or say, have you tried this or whatever, why do we listen to those ones? Listen to the supporters and the cheerleaders and the people who have your back and who want what's best for you.
Oh, yes, right. And that's where we elevate each other as moms. I don't do, I never had a clique. I never was in the mom club or anything of that nature. I felt like there's a lot of competition within my mom's groups that I would encounter at school. And the whole point in that is being authentic to who you are. And sometimes you have to stand out even from the mom crowd to be able to, right? Because when you're authentic, you can stay away, like you said, be with the group that is going to be your cheerleading, your support, because that's where we're going to get elevated.
Yes.
But if you want to stay in that level of suppression, of suffering, then share your story with them, because they'll find more to rip you apart. But if we're able to talk to and be in support with your cheerleaders, that's where we want moms to be.
And that brings a very good point. So I was fortunate to have some wonderful mum friends. And I remember at one time at one of our like mummy meetups or whatever you call it, one of them just bursting out crying to me. And she's like, I wish I was you. And I was like, excuse me. And she's like, I wish I couldn't breastfeed. And I was so confused. And she's like, I don't want to. I'm exhausted. Like it falls to me. I get up all night. My nipples are sore. I've had mastitis. I don't know how many times, but like I know breast is best and I want what's best for my son. And there's so much pressure from my husband. She goes, but if I was you, the choice would be taken away, like, because you just can't. And it's funny this is, for everyone to honor your body and what you want to do and what's best for you, because it can be easy. Like in a way, it's easier for me because, the choice was taken away. And I understand that now, because had I been her, I would have kept pushing through too, because you could see how determined I was to feed as it was.
Exactly.
And even if you don't have latch issues or mastitis, like if it's really uncomfortable, or if it's like, is it best for your child if it's not best for you? Like, not to be that you're uncaring, but when we put ourselves out so much that we are not bonding and not connecting and I just think so many times we do things because other people tell us, and then we disregard our own autonomy and what our body is telling us best for us.
Yes. Oh, I love it. And think of the trauma that not just the psyche, but on the body and the emotional trauma that was like a big one for you. That was like huge. I'm so grateful that you're on the podcast and you said yes to this, because this is exactly what I was looking for, is to bring this, this rawness. And I'm all about being raw, because that's just how I've grown. And that's authenticity. And that's the only way we're going to get out of what we're supposed to be. And like you said, our autonomy.
Yes. And I love how you said what we're supposed to be, because I think that brings apart the whole Insta, Facebook, like this is who I am externally. Like I love that meme that it's basically a little baby screaming in every capture. It's all little squares. And then finally it stops screaming and it's smiling. So like, quick, snap a photo. And they put it on like Facebook, and their friends are looking at it. Oh, look, a baby's so cute. We should have one. And it's like, because we only show the highlights, and then we compare our lives to someone else's highlight reel. And like, I share a lot about my children on social media. I share a lot. But also with my list, a little bit more because of the haters and trolls. But the other day I totally lost it at my kids, and I shared about it, and the number of people who wrote back, and I was like, I always thought I was a bad mum because I see all the amazing stuff you do with your kids, and I thought like I was missing something. And I'm like, no, we're all just as mucked up as each other, but we just don't talk about it because there's so much shame. And I have times where I'm not proud of how I behave, or if I'm like, if anyone else heard that, like, whew. But, it's normal. And I think it's more, and I love your show, and more normalizing these things and these experiences, because to be honest, you said about my second child, I always wanted two. I knew if I was going to have kids, I wanted two.
Okay.
But I wouldn't have had another one. Like, we weren't planning, and I had continued to gain weight after my daughter. So I thought it wasn't possible, because they say that the bigger you are, the harder it is. And it was a very difficult pregnancy because I was very large. But it was 100% a surprise. I cried every day during that pregnancy. And I remember in my last obstetrics appointment, I hired a private obstetrician. I was like, I don't care. And my husband had just been made redundant again. So it was so funny. My mum's like, don't you dare have any more kids, because anyway, long story short, the last appointment with my obstetrician, I just fell apart in his office, and he didn't push me out or rush me or whatever. That appointment went for over an hour, maybe it was even an hour and a half. And I remember walking out and seeing all the pregnant ladies in the waiting room like overflowing because I'd taken so long and how bad I felt. And he's like, don't you dare. And I just never felt so supported before.
I love that. Wow. And you needed that.
Yes. And that birth was everything. Like what I'd had the first time I'd hired a doula, ended up having to have an elective cesarean because of stuff. But anyway, because I was going to try again. After all that, I was going to try again because I wanted a birth. But the doula wasn't allowed in because they're not allowed only one person into theatre. So that was my husband. I wanted the curtain to come down so we could see him lifted out. I wanted my husband to cut the cord. I wanted the music I chose. I wanted to know when they started cutting, because that's the other thing I didn't share. For whatever reason, I don't know if it was because of an emergency or whatever, but they used diathermy with my daughter. So for anyone who doesn't know, that's what they use to seal the flesh. So I could smell my flesh burning. And to this day, it freaks me out, like smell of barbecue or something. It's like, no. And I remember saying to him, can you not use that? He's like, I don't. So he didn't even know the drugs. I was like, I don't want this drug and I don't want this drug because of the effects that I'd had. And and it was funny. So when he started to cut, he said to me, Suzanne, we're starting to cut now. Like it's literally. And I remember the midwife, and to this day too, because I've never seen a midwife chip a doctor before. I went to medical school, remember? And she was like, what are you doing? It's like, this is Suzanne's wishes. And everything was met. And it was just, and I still remember too, because my daughters took so long with my son, they're like, get ready, Dad. And I'm like, get ready for what? And the baby's here. It was just so fast. It was, a whole.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. I'm so happy you did have a different experience with the first one.
Yes.
And you, before getting on the podcast, you mentioned something about you felt something inside that it where you were like 17 weeks or something.
Oh yes. So my husband, when my daughter was 15 months, he was made redundant again. That place he worked for closed, so we couldn't find another job there. So I actually was working, so it was all good. But anyway, then we found out that I was pregnant. And he found a job that was fly in, fly out. So he was away a lot. And I was home. My daughter had tried to climb out of her cot and she got her knee stuck between the bars of the cot, but on the opposite side against the wall. So I couldn't reach her. So I had to lift the entire cot out from the wall so that I could free her. And when I did that, I felt this like pulling in my like groin. And I got my daughter free. And this is 17 weeks. So I hadn't felt him start to move yet. And I remember ringing my friend and she's like, you need to go to the hospital. Like you need to get that checked. And I was like, oh, no. And she's like, no, I'm coming over. So my friends descended. They were like amazing. One of them was like, I'm taking Xanthi, and the other one's like, I'm taking you to the hospital. I don't want you to drive. And they took me down to the local hospital and they put the Doppler on and they couldn't find the heartbeat. And they were like, oh, don't worry, our Doppler's a little bit dodgy. Just go see your doctor tomorrow. Like they were so calm about it. And I was a little bit trepidatious, but I was like, okay. And I booked into my doctor the next day, and I dropped Xanthi at daycare because she went to daycare, because normally I'd be working. I took the day off work, and he put the Doppler on, and he's like, he couldn't find it. And then he put the ultrasound on. Like, he's only not only, I shouldn't say that, but he was a general practitioner, so he didn't have all the gear. And just a little handheld ultrasound. And I still remember to this day him saying, I can see your baby, Suzanne, but I can't see any movement. So the chances are your baby has died. And I can just remember losing it, as you would expect. And he's like, but we'll need a full ultrasound, like at the place that has all the equipment to confirm. And then he's like, the nurse will handle you now. So he just went to the next patient. I get doctors are busy and whatever, but I felt kind of like palmed off. And so went into the nurse's office, like crying. And she's ringing around trying to find somewhere that could fit me in, like immediately for this ultrasound. And then she found it at the same place where I'd had my daughter. So that added to the stress. And I remember she's like, what are you doing? Because I stood up and I was like getting my keys. And she's like, you're not driving yourself. You know, like the how I was cared for in this moment to this day. I was like, well, how am I going to get there? My husband's fly in, fly out. My family's interstate. And she's like, well, who are your friends? Give me your phone. And she just rang the first one, and she's like, I can't do it, but I'll find someone. And someone else was picking up Xanthi from, like, they were amazing. And they all came in and cared for me. And then we drove into the appointment, and I remember going up to the receptionist to say that I was there, and she was all stroppy that they got me in short notice. She was like, oh, we're so busy. And the way, this is the thing that she said to me, that to this day, like, I understand people are busy. And she's like, the appointment is $380, or maybe it was $330. I know it was 300 something. She goes, but if your baby is indeed deceased, we will bulk bill you. So, like, they'll just take the government fee. It wasn't pretty. Totally lost my shit.
Yes, right. So
and my friend was there, and she was like calming me down. Anyway, when I went in for the scan and they, put the goop on and whatever, and she's like, there's baby. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, and there's the heartbeat. And I was like, oh
my gosh.
So he ended up being okay. But that's another experience of trauma that is hard to process or think, because he ended up being okay. It's kind of like, well, it doesn't matter. Or, other people have lost their child, or, it's not traumatic if the ending is happy. And it's like, it's still traumatic being told that your baby has died. And I remember going back to that doctor, and I was like, I can't see you again. I need a referral to someone else. Like, no. And then, I went private, even though it was a lot of money. I hired a doula, even though it was a lot of money. I was like, I can't be just a number. Like, as I said, I'm not trying to bag or knock. I understand the public system is overwhelmed. I understand all of these things, but, and they do the best they can. I get that, but I didn't feel cared for.
Wow.
And by going private and investing in that, it was a very different experience.
Oh, wow.
Because I was never weighed once by my private doctor. My public doctor weighed me every week, and I was shamed all the time. Like, you're gaining too much weight. You're gaining too much weight.
Oh, no.
I remember going private, and he's like, what do we need your weight for? And it was just such a relief.
Wow. Amazing. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that the baby, the second one, everything was fine. And
the delivery was beautiful. It was so healing. It was so lovely. I asked for all the things I want. Everybody advocated. And I remember leaving the hospital, because I'd never been to a private hospital, and they gave me this little onesie. It was like launched at, the hospital private. And they're like, we'll see you next time. And I remember just laughing, because I was like, I'm done. Done. But I just loved the way they were like, see you next time. And they didn't rush. They're like, just stay as long as you need to. And my husband was allowed to stay overnight. So my dad had come up, and he was looking after my daughter, and my husband could stay in. And besides that one nurse, everybody else did because we'd spoken. I'd had pre-appointments with a lactation consultant there, saying this is the experience I had the first time. And also too, my son was born very small. He didn't have any weight to lose. So they were monitoring that from the get-go. They were like, we need this kid to gain. And it's funny having a small baby after a really big one, because it's like, what do I do with this? Like, it's hilarious. So they were on top of it. They were on the ball, and we did try feeding. And I didn't do any of the drugs, like those. But then later we found out, but it was a lot more on the ball from day dot. And the lactation consultant, when she did come in, because I had him on a Friday, so she wasn't working on the weekend. And when she came in on the Monday, She's like, which midwife was it? I will sort it. So good.
That is so great. Now, you do coaching, right? Can you tell us a little
Yes.
bit about that? What is it that you do?
I have the most fabulous program. It's called Why Wait? So originally I was a weight loss coach because I had weighed twice as much as I did now, but I never asked people what they ate or how they exercised because I was never really interested in that, because we all know what to do. We just don't do it. So many of us,
That's simple.
we overconsume in whatever way, whether it be overeating, I'm a foodie, overworking, over scrolling, over candy crushing, like we do something. And I think what it stems for is so many of us are overgivers. We give to everybody else except ourselves. And giving and receiving are paired. So overgiving is paired with overconsuming. So how many of us say today is going to be the day, and then all day we're like good, and then we're staying up late watching Netflix, eating chips and going, oh, tomorrow will be the day. So what I work with women in my group program is like how to say no without feeling mean, because when we say no to others, we can say yes to ourselves. True self-care, not oils and massages, though they are nice. I'm not knocking those, but true self-care is accepting the help that's offered, even what's going on in your mind, making the appointment at the doctors that you've been avoiding, going for that walk, even though you'd rather just stay home or tell yourself you do it tomorrow, like these little steps. And it's also overarching all of that is just sharing and being heard, because how many of us in our day-to-day lives have these experiences? We don't have anybody to listen. And if we try and share with, say, like our husband or our parents, they mean well, but they try to fix it. And it's like, we don't need fixing. We're not broken, but just someone to share that and witness that and the healing that happens in community. So that's the program. It runs, funnily enough, 4 times a year for 10 weeks. And people are like, why that? I'm like, because I run it on the school terms, because that's what suits me. So I model that, putting myself first. And this is the time that works. And then I get school holidays off to spend with the kiddos.
Oh, that's lovely. And this is what it's all about, right? Is to put ourselves first in a way where we can self-care, and then we can extend that love of ourselves to the children and be available like you do it.
Yes, it's great. And also too, because I work for myself, if there's a school carnival, if there's a fundraiser, if there's like all those things, I have the flexibility to be able to attend the spelling bee, the dance competition. And I just love it. And my children, are very much a part of my business. So if you follow me on socials, very recently I did a rebrand. So I've got this new backdrop that you can see behind me.
Yes.
And my children love gender reveals. They're obsessed with them. They watch them on like TikTok all the time.
Okay.
And anyway, so they did the backdrop reveal. It's like, it's not a boy, it's not a girl, it's a backdrop. It's so funny. But they love the fans. They talk to my clients, and they're very much a part of my business. When I released my book last year, it's funny. It's like, here's my book. And I came home one day and the pair of them had defaced it, like as in crossed out Suzanne Culberg and written Xanthi Culberg, my book, not mummy's, and whatever. I took a photo of it and put it on social media. So now anyone in Australia, if you wanted a signed copy, posting overseas is very difficult since COVID. But they have commissioned copies that they send to people. It's so funny. But because it's like I think so many of us, we work like we don't have children, and then we mother like we don't work. And we wonder why there's no work-life balance.
Yes, that's right.
So absolutely. Part of the boundaries I help people with is creating boundaries with your children. So like where we're recording this right now, I have a little sign outside my door that says no. So that means don't come in here unless there's blood. It's always an exception. and Dad's home too right now, so they can go see him. But other times, if I'm, say, doing emails or writing blogs, it'd be yes. So they know, yes, mummy is working, but we can come in for a cuddle or to ask, can you take the lid off this or whatever. And then, so when I'm away from my desk, I'm fully present. I don't check DMs, so don't DM me. I don't, when I'm with my kids, when I'm with the kids, and when I work, I work. And I think so many of us, what we do incidentally is we never truly rest. We just change roles. We're like, I'm working, I'm mumming, I'm cleaning. And so many people say to me, I took the day off. And I'm like, so what did you do? Clean the house, paid the bills, did the groceries. So you didn't take a day off then, did you? You changed roles. Like when you take a day off, I go to the movies, or I sit outside, or I read a book. Like that is true time off. It's not me balancing other things.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. I think that is so needed, and it's so real. This is, like you said, all you did was change roles. You didn't take
Yes.
time out for yourself. Wow.
Yeah, so we're recording
That's
this on Saturday
huge.
morning my time because, in the future in Australia. So after this, I'm going to the chiropractor because like I swear by them.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm going to my daughter's gymnastics, and then I'm going to speech therapy with my son. But yeah, in each of those things, I'm present. I don't, and if you do, and it's no shame or shade or judgment to checking your phone or whatever, but I find we end up so connected. And so, and it all came about because one day my son came over to me and asked something, and I half answered, as you do.
Mm-hmm.
And he said something like, "Oh, you love your phone more than me." I can't remember what it was, but it was something like it cut me to the core. And I was like, yeah, this has got to stop. So sometimes it is hard. And sometimes if they're bickering, I just want to play a game to drown it out. And sometimes I still do. But it's to be like when you're fully present, the quality time, you don't need as much quantity. And sometimes we feel, oh, we're there all the time, but we're not really there because we're checked out playing Candy Crush or whatever.
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate that. Well, I'm going to have you back again. We had so much
I'd love to come
about.
back again. It was fabulous.
Yeah. So great. All right. Well, I want the audience to be able to take a golden nugget. Is there one more thing that you'd like to tell the audience before we close?
You can be a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. So if you have the moments where you're feeling everything's too hard and I'm not good at this and whatever, like we all have those moments. But it reminds me, but we're all still a masterpiece. Like that Japanese art, I always pronounce it wrong, but kitsuingi or kits, where you put the gold in the cracks. And I think for all of us who are mothers, like we might not have got the journey in the way that we hoped, the picture perfect TV version. But our kids, like, it's funny, I was at the park the other day and I met another mum and I was watching our kids run around together and I was like, nobody knows how they were born or how they were fed or anything. Yeah. They are. But what was obvious is how much they were loved.
Yes. Thank you for that. And I just want to reiterate, that just really touched me. You can be a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. And that's bringing grace and compassion and unconditional love to the mom herself to be able to be both.
Yes. And some days, it's like, this is my masterpiece day. And sometimes this is my work in progress day, or even moments. Like, do you ever look in the mirror and you're like, I look fabulous. And then an hour later, you're like, what on earth? You haven't changed. It's been 1 hour. It's your thoughts have. So, it's just like, oh, take a moment here.
So true. So true. Well, thank you so much. I'll be putting your links where the listeners, the audience, the moms can take a look at you and see how they can work with you. And you have your book out, so that would be great too. If you guys support her with her book, I would love that. So thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate being on, and till the next time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast. If you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any new episodes. It would also mean the world to me if you're able to take a moment and rate and review my podcast on how it was helpful to you. Also, please connect with me on my social media platforms. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next episode.